Hello everybody, Jack here, and today we will continue our discussion on analyzing and looking into power dynamics. And today I would like to talk about group polarization. In present day discourse, there's a lot of talk about polarizations in our society, although it seems a lot of it is stemming from the American context, but regardless, it is a seminal idea to more critically look into it. So let's begin, shall we? The theory of group polarization reveals one of the most potent but yet most underestimated forces that drives the evolution of power. When people in a like-minded group deliberate together, their views tend to become more extreme. This principle, while originating in social psychology, has vast implications for governance, ideology, warfare, and systemic stability. In the long arc of power, the internal consensus is both a source of strength and a precursor to collapse. At the core of group polarization is the amplification of belief. When individuals with similar perspectives engage in discussion, they do not moderate each other. They often intensify. Moderates become radicals, strategic minds become ideologues, and pragmatists adopt messianic certainty. This is not just merely about opinion. It is more about identity reinforcement. As individuals align with a group, they begin to internalize group loyalty as a form of self-definition. To maintain status or trust within the group, members begin to signal deeper commitments, more extreme rhetoric, or tighter conformity. This feedback loop creates a self-reinforcing environment where deviation is punished, thus reducing the diversity of thought. Extremity becomes the currency. Those who are most uncompromising often rise the fastest, and reality is bent to preserve the group's coherence. Contradictions are reinterpreted, not acknowledged. And we have a few examples from history. The first one is revolutionary France, where we saw moderates like the Girondins being beheaded by the Jacobins, who were in turn replaced by Robespierre's Committee of Public Safety. In the Soviet Union, especially under Stalin, the elites experienced wave after wave of purges, not because of external enemies, but because internal group dynamics demanded ritualistic purification. In the modern age, polarized democracies become dysfunctional as each faction radicalizes in response to the other, creating ideological arms race with no off-ramps. So while it's evident polarization can be destabilizing, it can also be used in a very pragmatic and strategic manner. Authoritarian regimes and insurgency movements likely understand how to exploit polarization to consolidate power. State actors do so by unifying internal populations by identifying a common enemy. Suppress dissent by forcing binary choices, aka you're with us or you're against us. Strengthen regime legitimacy by framing criticism as disloyalty or betrayal. In contrast, non-state actors like ideological groups, military and cyber militias, or political factions utilize polarization by disrupting existing institutions, by inflaming tribal identities, mobilize grassroots power through emotional charged narratives, and erode the center, forcing neutral or undecided actors to choose sides. This is why information warfare, particularly in the digital era, is no longer about changing minds. It's about splitting societies into irreconcilable tribes. Polarization becomes the battlefield where control is asserted, not by persuasion, but by separation. And this is further amplified or weaponized by digital infrastructures. Because social media platforms do not simply allow people to share opinions, they algorithmically curate what we see, prioritizing content that provokes an emotional engagement. The result of this is perception bubbles or echo chambers where dissenting views are filtered out, agreement is amplified, and complexity is reduced to memeable certainty. These bubbles operate as decentralized echo chambers, each with its own ideological gravity, pulling users deeper into a self-reinforcing belief system whose implications are that national unity fractures into identity clusters, global discourse splinters into tribalistic dialects, and narratives evolve independently of facts, often driven by emotional validation rather than empirical data. Importantly, the design of these systems reward polarizations because fear, rage, and identity validation produces the most engagement. And thus, this feedback loop is not a bug, but rather a feature of the present-day attention economy. However, polarization can be guided, but only if its internal mechanics are understood. Thus, political and institutional leaders, as well as everyday people, should learn to harness unity without encouraging extremism, and to create adaptive systems that permit dissent without fragmentation. Some ideas are like a constructive dissent loop, where power structures should institutionalize internal disagreements not as token of opposition, but as formal mechanisms of renewal. We should also have shared meta-narratives. Societies require overarching identities that transcend partisan divides. Rituals, myths, or even shared histories are large enough to hold contradictions of society together. And promoting multipolarity of thought. Intelligence agencies, think tanks, and governance systems should actively simulate competing worldviews to avoid self-blindness. This is not like both-sidism or Bonapartism, but rather strategic counterframing. Moreover, those who seek to influence others, whether through governance, diplomacy, or information operations, must understand that polarization can be triggered or mitigated to either destabilize a system by amplifying its internal contradictions, or to rebuild a new one by identifying and reinforcing its unifying myths and symbols. In the end, we can view polarization as either a weapon to destroy society, a warning sign that we are heading towards collapse if we do not reassess the ideas that govern our everyday, or it could also be a window of opportunity to either exploit the weaknesses of others or to mitigate the weaknesses of yourself. Thus, I think it's very important that we counter polarization as much as we can, at least from an individual level where in your realm of control, and then slowly scaling it up to larger and larger systems. And I think democracy is the best way for an individual to partake in this. But alas, I will be very curious to hear your point of views and your ideas and how you understand these things I just talked about. So let's have a discussion in the comments down below.